name's Dominic Boyle. As Luke said, I'm the project director for Westport. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some of the detailed design or concept design that we have for the Westport project. Just before I get into that, just sort of highlight some of the reasons why we're actually promoting Westport as a project. This map shows the location of the major container ports around Australia. You can see there's 4 ports that serve the east coast of Australia. Fremantle is the only major container port in the west. It's about 2,700 kilometres, the nearest one, which is Adelaide. Around 2/3 of our containers come in through into WA through Fremantle, with the remaining third coming by land, predominantly rail. And so that really highlights the importance of Fremantle as a container port. You know, it's obviously vital to support the functioning of the WA economy. And work that has been done more recently suggests that Fremantle will start to run out of capacity around the 2040s. Westport's a long-term project, so if we're going to replace that container port to protect the future economy, we really have to start that work now, which is why Westport's currently undertaking this business case phase. Just going on as sort of very brief history of Westport for any attendees who haven't sort of been following recent events. Westport was established with the Westport Task Force in 2017, and at the top of that slide there, you'll see the sort of 3 locations of Kwinana, Fremantle, and Bunbury, which were considered by the Westport Task Force. That detailed study identified Kwinana as the preferred location for the future container port. So what the Westport office has been doing since that date is really looking at the more detailed concept designs for the port and the land side. We're not just looking at the container port itself, but looking at the whole container supply chain that's required to support it. So the process we went through on the port side, we took the location which was preferred and identified by the Westport Task Force. We've done a lot of optioneering around terminal configurations. We looked at 30 different potential design options. We shortlisted that down to 7, and then went through some very detailed multi-criteria analysis to refine that down to 3. And then a further process of design refinement and modelling took that down to the preferred design option, which I'll describe shortly. On the land side, at the outset of the Westport office stage, and the current stage we're in, we looked at a number of different potential IMT locations. We've done very detailed landside modelling as well, looking at road and rail links and preferred intermodal terminal locations. And we shortlisted that down to 5 potential combinations of IMTs, and we've now got that down to 3 preferred locations, which I'll describe shortly. And apologies for using the sort of abbreviations there, but if anyone's not aware, an intermodal terminal is a location where we transfer containers from one transport mode to another, and that's the IMT locations we're talking about are all where we move containers from the port to a location on rail and then transfer them to road to then be moved on to their final packing or unpacking destinations. I talked about some of the sort of analysis and optioneering that we did. You probably, if you'd attended previous workshops, you would have seen these Westport goals before. So I won't go through them in detail now. I'll just probably say that we use these goals and those criteria that flow from the goals to consider all the different options we had, so to make sure that the options that we did select as preferred were the ones which most closely aligned with these goals, which include things like obviously having the most efficient supply chain and making sure we had the best outcome for the community and for the WA economy. Also, in terms of those goals and options and the process we went through, we evaluated it through very detailed processes which we tested with a number of key stakeholders. Again, won't read through them all now. You can see the sort of range of organisations that we consulted about the goals and sub-goals. and they also participated in the workshops themselves, or in actually testing the outcomes of those workshops. One of the useful outcomes we had from that consultation was that we identified a number of sensitivity tests, which we used to make sure that we had finally arrived at the preferred solution, which basically took into account the feedback. Those sensitivity tests showed that under all the different scenarios we tested, that the preferred option we've selected is the most robust. So in terms of the Westport infrastructure, I'm going to have to borrow Claire's computer because space is blocking the slides. So just going through this slide, just to describe the scope of the preferred option. So in the legend there, you'll see that number 1 is the new port facilities. So that's the new container terminal down at Kwinana, and that is the location that we selected following all that marine optioneering work. I'll describe that in a bit more detail in a subsequent slide. And number 2 on that list are the intermodal terminals. So you'll see those locations in the top right-hand corner of the map. We've basically identified locations at Forestfield, Kenwick, and Hewdale. The fact that they're all sort of so close together is because that Hewdale precinct is really the centre of gravity of demand for containers. 80% of the containers that come in and out of the port either are destined for that location or originating from that destination. So it's really the most efficient location to make sure that we move the containers to where the economy needs them. Come on to a bit more detail about IMTs later. On the road side, you'll see number 3 there is the Anketel Road upgrade. So Anketel Road, you'll see the container terminal at the end of Anketel Road. We're proposing as part of the project to upgrade that to a dual carriageway with a couple of grade separations and some intersection upgrades. That will provide access to the port terminal both for freight when it's in operation, but also for construction purposes. We need to have that road in place to help with the heavy civil construction of the port. In the first instance, we're proposing that container trucks accessing that Hewdale area will use Kwinana Freeway. So we're proposing to widen Kwinana Freeway to 3 lanes between Thomas Road and Russell Road, which is that existing 2-lane section. Then also to widen Row Highway between the freeway and Orang Road to 3 lanes. That is really to serve the first few years of the port operation. In the longer term, we see that Anketel Road being upgraded to connect along with Thomas Road to connect to Tonkin Highway. So in the future, when Tonkin Highway has also been upgraded, Anketel Road will be provided to provide that free-flowing freight route right through to Tonkin Highway and up to Hewdale following that route. There's also obviously a government imperative to move as many containers on rail as we possibly can. So you'll see there item 7 there is a duplication of the freight line between Westport and the Coburn Triangle junction there you can see on the map. So that'll be a duplication of the line, providing another section of track over that length. And then also removing a series of level crossings, and that includes a significant level crossing removal on North Lake Road, which will make sure that we don't cause traffic congestion, because obviously an increased number of trains would see those existing barriers going down more than they are at present. Item 8 you can see on the map there is a proposed channel. So number 9 you can see on the map there that they are the existing channels which go through the Success and Parmelia banks. We're proposing to dredge a new channel which needs to be slightly deeper and wider than the existing channels to provide for the larger vessels which are expected to visit WA in the future. And then all of that work will allow them the future development of Fremantle for other purposes. There's another project which you may be aware of called the Future of Fremantle, which is looking at what we'll do with the existing port area in Fremantle once Westport is provided and other trades in Fremantle are potentially relocated away. Just a bit more detail on the port terminal itself. You'll see the red dotted line there. That is the location that the terminal was proposed at the end of stage 2, which is the Westport Task Force work. We've done some very detailed optioneering, as I referred to earlier. That's resulted in the terminal being moved slightly further to the south, which is sort of across the foreshore in front of the BP former refinery. The main reason for that move was it was actually from an environmental perspective, it was the most beneficial location. So it really minimises our impact on the marine environment within Cockburn Sound. We're very pleased to say that both the terminal location, sort of the dredging that we're proposing within the Sound, and the proposed Breakwater location, they all avoid any significant areas of seagrass within Cockburn Sound. So that was one of the main reasons for relocating the terminal slightly further south. You'll see there that we actually avoid some pipes which serve the Synergy and Newgen power stations. We also avoid a direct impact on pipelines for the Perth desalination plant, although we are looking at hydrodynamic modelling to make sure that we understand what the indirect impacts on those facilities are as well. Another key feature of this location is that we now incorporate the replacement for the Kwinana bulk terminal within the Westport footprint. So in blue on that slide at the southern end, you'll see an access corridor and a sort of wharves and quay line at the end of the formation. That'll provide the new replacement KBT jetty. Moving on to the next slide. One of the items which wasn't considered in detail at the Westport Task Force stage was whether there would be a requirement for a breakwater to serve the new container terminal. It was a question which was sort of left open at that time. So what we've been doing over the last 18 months is some very detailed wave modelling and consideration of what impact that would have on our preferred terminal location. This is a heat map which shows what wave heights would be like in the event of a significant sort of storm event, and that shows sort of very significant waves all the way up to the shoreline, which is users of the Sound are probably well familiar with. And this next slide shows what the effect of a breakwater is. So that really protects the container berths there along the terminal from those waves. And what that means is that we have a much higher level of berth availability than would be the case without a breakwater. We'd probably be looking at the terminal only being available, or the berths only being available for around 60% of the time, 60-70% say, in the without a breakwater. That breakwater allows us to have the berths available well over 90% of the time. So it's a key feature of the port design. It's really important to make sure that we can maintain operations of the port as much as possible to make sure that we keep the flow of containers moving. A bit more about the IMTs. I mentioned earlier that we started off at the start of the current stage with 8 potential IMT locations. The very detailed modelling we did of the landside container supply chain highlighted those locations in Forestfield, Kenwick and Kewdale as the preferred locations. The locations sort of further north and south, say Bullsbrook in the north or Oakford and Wundajong in the south, they were so far from that centre of gravity of demand that they weren't found to be to attract sufficient demand for container import and export. But one of the key features of Westport is to make sure that we maintain as much flexibility for the future as possible. So, for example, Bullsbrook, the land in Bullsbrook, which was added tonight, is already protected for a future IMT. And there's discussions ongoing with Department of Planning about making sure that the Wundajong site is potentially protected for the future as well. So that's the combination of IMTs that we've settled upon. Forestfield is already in operation. That's an existing import-export IMT location. Kenwick is due to come online in the near future. Our proposal would see an additional siding added at Kenwick around the time of port opening. Then Qdale would come online probably towards the end of the 2040s. Once those two sites, once the number of containers has grown so much that the capacity at Forestfield and Kenwick is being reached. And that combination of IMTs we see serving us right through to the end of the study period, with a much higher level of rail mode share than we're currently having. I think that takes us to about 30 to 40%, depending on the level of trade growth. We're currently at about a 20% rail mode share level, so it really is looking to increase that mode share as we move through into the future. Just a bit about the modelling of the road network. So as I said earlier, the primary destination for containers is that Qdale and Kenwick area. The modelling we've undertaken suggests that the time that the port opens, the quickest route will be to go along Angertell Road, Cwnara Freeway and Row Highway. That's about 6 kilometres shorter than using Angertell, Thomas and Tonkin Highway. In the longer term, though, once there's more traffic on the freeway and more development has taken place, the longer term route remains as that which was previously announced, which will be the Angertell Road route on up Tonkin Highway, as I described. So we're making sure that we do all the necessary protection of the land of Angertell Road east of the freeway, so that land is protected and reserved when that future upgrading is required. And as I mentioned earlier, the upgrading of Angertell Road between the freeway and the port terminal will be built earlier in the construction schedule to make sure that we've got access to the site for heavy construction. Now, that's just a bit more detail on the actual upgrading of Angertell Road. As I described earlier, it's likely to be a 4-lane dual carriageway with interchanges at Rockingham Road, which will be quite a substantial structure to get up and over Rockingham Road and down onto the port precinct. And then 2 further interchanges and traffic signal intersections at Abercrombie Road and Mandogalup Road. And then obviously a significant interchange at the Cwnara Freeway is existing. We'd be looking to make some upgrades to that interchange as well. So that's bit more detail on the design of Westport, and happy to throw it open to questions.
Great, thank you, Dom. Just while we're waiting to see if any questions come through, you mentioned stage 2 of Westport, which was the task force, and then this current stage 3 of Westport. I wonder if you could just give a bit of a distinction between the 2 stages, and what, I guess, the key tasks of each stage were or have been.
Yeah, so the stages sort of compare back to the Infrastructure Australia evaluation framework, and in their process, stage 2 is looking at an options assessment. So that is really looking at, and that's what the stage 2 task force work was about, was looking at different options, but just in terms of locations for a port. Stage 3 of that process is then the business case phase. When you complete a business case, you sort of refresh that options assessment again, but also refine down. So the options we looked at the business case stage are more around the actual different options to provide the port in Cwnara, and also to look at the land side stage as well. So stage 3 is the business case. Future stages will be the project definition planning, when the business case will provide sufficient information for the government to make an investment decision and to proceed to the next stage. If that investment decision is made, the project definition phase will then do more work, more design refinement, basically get a thorough handle on costs and risks and opportunities, and then position us to be able to procure delivery contracts for a project to proceed if the government made a final investment decision once they had all that information to hand.
There's a question here from Shane in the chat asking, how is Westport planning to manage impacts to KBT jetty during construction?
So KBT is an absolute critical piece of infrastructure for the state. It's actually the sole clinker import facility for the southern part of the state. Clinker is a material which is used in the production of cement. So if we're unable to maintain that facility, then we can't make any concrete. And as well as all the concrete we need for everything else in WA, we actually need quite a lot of concrete to build this port as well. So we're pretty well motivated to make sure that we maintain the operation of that jetty. The terminal footprint you can see on the slide in front of you now, that actually sits on top of the existing jetty. So we've done some very detailed and careful construction staging to make sure that we actually provide the access corridor to the new jetty and do the land reclamation for the new jetty first. We then get the new jetty fully operational before we actually decommission and demolish the existing jetties and then proceed with the rest of the construction of Westport. So there's a number of key activities we need to complete before we actually start the main construction of the port terminal, and KBT is front and centre of that. So it's absolutely essential that we provide that facility, and because the target date of the early 2030s to make sure that we have that up and running in time for the rest of Westport.
Perhaps just while we wait to see if there's any more questions that come through, something that I hear get asked a little bit is just around the distinction between the ultimate design for the Anketel-Thomas Road freight corridor and I guess the staged approach of using Anketel-Kwinana Road. Are you able just to talk through, I know you touched on that a little bit, Dom, but if you could just explain the staging approach and why that's part of the Westport design?
Yeah, so back in the stage 2 days, there was the Anketel Road corridor was identified as the primary access to the port, just based on its location on the coastline. So it's always been the intention that Anketel Road be the ultimate or long-term corridor. When we embarked on the very detailed modelling as part of the current stage, it was suggesting that the quickest and shortest route to the key locations for containers was to follow the freeway and Roe Highway. So the modelling we've done suggests that that's the more economic solution. It's also sort of the safest solution in terms of both the freeway and Roe Highway are sort of fully grade separated. So there are very few sort of at-grade intersections or driveways onto those roads, if you like, where those interactions with other vehicles might occur. Tonkin Highway still has a number of traffic signal intersections which are very busy along the route. There's funding in place to actually grade separate a few of those intersections, but there's still a number which are to be grade separated in the future. So it's sort of a combination of as traffic volumes increase on the freeway and it starts to reach its increased capacity, in the same sort of time period as that eventuates, grade separations hopefully will have been completed on Tonkin Highway. We'll then complete the Anketel Road East corridor, and that will form a longer term route through to the Kewdale area. Hope that answered that question.
That's great. Thank you, Dom. I think looks like there's no more questions in the chat, so happy to wrap it up there. So thank you again, Dom, and I would just encourage everyone to head to Westport, to the Westport website, for more information on future webinars. We're really keen to address key questions from community. So if you have a question, we'd love to hear from you. And this is a great place for us to address it and to really dig into more detail. So thank you again. We'll wrap up the session there.
Thank you.